So I just read Lionel Johnson, Lord of the First by David Guymer, and it wasn't very good. The story is pretty simple. There's a planet that is infested with a mind-controlling Xenos race that seems to act as a psychic parasite of sorts. The Dark Angels are then dispatched to this planet to wipe the Xenos race from the page of history. There are two things the book does pretty well, and then there's a whole bunch of stuff that the book does less well, but let's get started with the good things. First of all, I quite like how the book shows the secrecy and paranoid nature of the Dark Angels working in their favor for a change. In other books, the Dark Angels seem particularly good at shooting themselves in the foot with their secretive antics, but against an enemy capable of reading minds, this need-to-know basis of the Dark Angels works greatly in their favor. Sure, this is against an enemy specifically designed to show off how cool the Dark Angels are, but still, the same would hold true against other magically adept factions. Next up is the badass, one-liner spitting anime portrayal of the Lion. The Lion sees himself as the best of the Primarchs, and he is also portrayed that way. Never before have I seen a Primarch portrayed in such an overpowered manner. This guy doesn't read documents, he doesn't even look at them. No, he gives them a casual glance and puts them in his picture-perfect memory. He is so fast that even his sons can't keep track of his movements. To them, it seems as if he just teleported out of nowhere. His psychic powers are so strong that he easily shrugs off the mind control powers of the Xenos, after which he just pulls a Uni-Reverse card on them and reads their mind instead. This in combination with some awesome quotable speeches, cool one-liners and an ego of immense proportions makes for a character that's so dumb that you can't help but love him. He's a bit like Kaiba from the Yu-Gi-Oh! Abridged series, for anyone who's seen that. On the other hand, this merry sooness of the Primarch is also reflected in the entirety of the Dark Angels in this novel. They are said to be better siege masters than the Iron Warriors and the Imperial Fists, better craftsmen than the Salamanders or the Iron Hands, stealthier than the Raven Guard or Night Lords, and so on and so forth. Oh yeah, and by the way, they are in possession of all the shit that was banned after the Dark Age of technology, but more on that later. I get that this is the Dark Angel novel, and that it is meant to please the Dark Angel fans, but this is just absurd, and makes it so that the Legion suffers a bit from the Superman problem, where a character is so good at everything that it just becomes boring at some point. The Dark Age of technology stuff, however, also causes another plot problem, and that is that most of the plot feels like one of those ridiculous animes. You know, those where one guy pulls out an ultra gun, but don't worry because the other guy has an extra ultra gun. Or in the case of the Dark Angels, a super special, awesome, mega ultra extra nuclear cannon gun wizard. It's a bit like writing a book about the quest of a guy to swat a fly. There's not a whole lot of room for tension left there. On top of that, I think that many will also be disappointed that there was such a focus on random sci-fi Brabble weaponry, but not a whole lot on the Dark Angels themselves. We don't learn much about the Primarch on an emotional level, and compared to most other Primarch books, I feel we also didn't get a very unique image of the Legion. The biggest flaw of this book, however, is the writing style, which is pretentious, crowded, and often completely nonsensical. For starters, Guymer feels the need to use the most complicated, archaic words for extremely simple things. Like for an example, a dude moving his arm is described as Goliath slaps of gene-forged musculature sliding across his shoulder. Maybe Guymer tries to make the book sound smarter or cooler by doing this, but in my opinion it accomplishes nothing except making it harder to read. Or maybe he just tried to make the writing as pretentious as the Legion, in which case I'd call it a huge success. There's also a completely unnecessary amount of words and descriptions everywhere. Things are introduced in length only for them to be completely discarded by the plot on the very next page, and I really don't see why every battle sequence has to be interrupted by descriptions of random things that happen to be nearby. The funniest thing about this, however, is that many of these descriptions are also about alien or high-tech stuff, so you just get a list of completely nonsensical words to make it sound cool. For those who read it, these problems are a bit reminiscent of the Ferrus Manus Primarch book. All in all, I'm giving this one 2 out of 5 top-decked Exodias. The book does a good job of showing you the usefulness of working on a need-to-know basis, and anime Mary Sue Lionel Johnson was pretty fun to read about. The lack of any tension or emotional depth combined with the flawed writing style, however, makes it so that I really can't rate this book any higher. If you like the Dark Angels, you can read this book, but I would instead advise you to read the Primarch book of Leman Russ, as that, surprisingly enough, contains a better portrayal of the Lion than this book. Then to the tier list. So it took a while, but until they release the next Primarch book, the tier list is complete. Lord of the First ends up above the Gilliman book because unlike the other 2-star books, the ridiculously overpowered bullshit of the angels in this book makes it a somewhat decent ironic read. You can't help but laugh as the Lion just casually shit talks all of the other Primarchs and Legions, so yeah, that's pretty decent I guess.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing and click ringing the bell to appease the Great Horned Rat. For more lore content, please check my main channel and leave any book recommendations in the comments down below. I gotta get back to reading the next book.